Now it's time to do some fun, interesting stuff. We're going to take this blank scene here and we're going to populate it with actual objects and start to bring in our environment. So how are we going to do that? Well, let me show you. Okay, so over here, as we stated before in the previous video, we have this project area over here. We have the standards folder with a bunch of stuff. Now, very important, project management. It's very important to manage a project and organize everything. Now, some of you out there might be thinking, well, don't worry about organizing. I just want to learn how to use Unity. I don't want to spend time on organizing. Well, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to. With a complex next-gen game, you're going to be working literally with thousands of assets. If you don't start organizing your stuff early on, you're going to end up in a world of hurt. Take it from me. Take my advice. You want to stay organized before you even start working on your game. Okay, very important. So, in order to stay organized, here's what I'm going to do. I have the standard assets folder where all my standard assets are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click in this area and I'm going to go to create. I'm going to go to folder and I'm going to create myself a new folder. Alright? I'm going to rename this folder to something else. So let me call it warehouse, because we're going to be building a sort of warehouse type level in this scene. So I'm going to call this basically the warehouse level, or just warehouse. So if we had, say, if this was a first-person shooter with several different, maybe multiplayer maps, this would be the warehouse map. There might be other ones like, I don't know, submarine or back alley, streets, mountains, whatever it is. This one's going to be warehouse, okay? So in this warehouse folder, we can actually create more subfolders, which is actually what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and create a subfolder. To create a subfolder for the warehouse folder right here, if I right-click on top of that warehouse folder while it's selected, I can go to create a new folder, all right? And this folder is now placed underneath the warehouse folder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this new folder to something that makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to make a folder for meshes. Basically, these will be the 3D objects I bring into my scene. Okay? So I'm going to call this meshes, and that's pretty much it. The next thing I'm going to do is start to import my assets. Now, there's two ways that we can import assets. Way number one is the correct way that Unity likes and Unity advocates, okay? And then there's way number two. Way number two is the way that I'm going to do it to get the job done faster and easier, even though Unity doesn't really like it when you do that, okay? Alright, so Unity prefers that you work with this project pane inside of the Unity UI to import objects. So let's see how that works. Pretty simple. Basically, if I go ahead and select one of these folders, for example, let's say meshes, I'm going to right click on top of it, and in this right click menu I can choose a whole bunch of different options. I'm going to click on import new asset. Okay, when I do that, a file browser window opens up asking me, okay, go find the asset you want to import in to Unity. And the type of asset we're going to import in right now is meshes. In other words, 3D geometry, 3D objects. These could be anything. They could be characters, they could be boxes, they could be cars, they can be guns, they can be trees, they can be any type of object that you want to bring into your world. Where I'm going to go up one folder. With this tutorial, I've included a folder called game assets, game_assets. And if you go in that folder, you'll find there's two directories in here, a meshes directory and a textures directory. If you go to the meshes directory, you find yourself quite a number of different Fbx files or meshes in here that we can import into Unity. Okay, so let's start off with maybe the cables and pipes up here, the first one. Okay, so I'll double click it, and Unity's going to go ahead and import that in. And when it does, I get my import options over here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, it also creates a materials folder that if we open up, it brings in a whole bunch of materials that it creates for these objects that I brought in. Okay, you saw the list of objects that I was importing in. There's a pretty big list. So if I go back to the meshes folder and I hit import new asset, I can import the ceiling object next, then debris, then doors, then exterior buildings, so on and so forth. Now I can't just select and then shift select all this stuff. You know, I can't select two things. I have to do it one at a time. Now, if you had to import for a next-gen game, say 200 objects, it would be a real pain to have to come in here and do this process, do this importing process one at a time for 200 objects. You could see how you would be very inclined to pull your hair out. That's not very efficient. This is where the Unity workflow can hit some limitations, and you probably don't want to import using this method. Okay, it's just not going to work out for you. So I'm going to hit cancel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these objects here that I imported in. I'm going to hit delete on the keyboard. Unity's going to ask me, are you sure you want to delete these assets? You cannot undo once you delete. I'm going to say yes, delete that stuff. Okay. So the way that I advocate you should import large amounts of data into Unity, because when working on an next-gen game you have to, there's no way around it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use Windows Explorer to copy and paste files back and forth. Okay. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go to my directory here. If I go to Windows Explorer, I'm going to go to the Game Assets directory. Okay. I'm going to go to the Meshes folder. I'm going to select everything that there is in here, and I'm going to hit Control-C to copy it. All right. And what I want to do is I want to paste that inside of the folder that I need. So what I can do is I can right-click on this Meshes folder, and I can hit the Show in Explorer. Okay. By hitting the Show in Explorer button, what's going to happen is a new Windows Explorer window will open up, showing me that folder. So it's just a quick way of getting into that directory with Windows Explorer. So I'll double-click on Meshes. You can see that it's empty right now because, as you can see inside of my Unity project directory over here, my Meshes folder is empty. So I'll go with Windows Explorer, hit Control-V to paste, and I'll paste all of those files in. Okay. Now when I go back to Unity, you're going to see that Unity's automatically going to import all of this stuff in, which is fantastic. So I didn't have to go in there and import everything one by one. So if I had 200 objects, it would just automatically, just kind of a batch import, just import everything in, boom, 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 200 objects, all in one shot. Okay, so here's all the objects. Here's the materials folder created with all the materials for all of these objects, which is fantastic. And we're going to get into materials later, so don't worry about that now. And then we have our FBX files here and our FBX importer options. Okay, so the basically the way this works is pretty simple. When we select one of these FBX files in here, we get ourselves the FBX importer options in the inspector. Okay, now these options are pretty important because they determine how your objects are going to be imported into Unity. So I'm going to go over some of the most common parameters here. I'm not going to go over every single one. There's just a lot of different parameters here to cover. So just going over basic ones that you'll need for this tutorial. Things like scale factor. Scale factor is very important. It determines the size of the object when it comes into Unity. Scale is very important. You want to make sure that when you're working on a game project, you have your scale figured out. Now, what I mean by that is you have to know what scale you're working at in your 3D application, say like Maya or Max or whatever it is, and also inside of Unity. So everything should match up really nicely because this can make a big difference when you're working on your game in terms of animation, physics, lighting, different things like that. Okay, very important. So what I'm going to do is that for each of these objects, I'm going to set up a specific type of parameter set here. For the scale factor, I'm going to set the scale factor at 1. By default, Unity tries to set it at 0.01. I like to set it at 1 here. That way the scale isn't affected. It basically comes 1 to 1. Doesn't get changed. Mesh compression basically compresses the meshes to make the end result smaller. I'm going to take mesh compression off. I don't like the idea of Unity, or anyone for that matter, compressing my meshes or messing around with them, because you may end up with some quirky results. So for the most part, I mean, this stuff doesn't mess up your models. Don't think of it that way. But I'm going to leave mesh compression off. Generate colliders. This is actually a very important option. When your characters or your players are playing a game, if you're going to have, you know, a character walking on a surface like a ground, a floor, something like that, or a street, a sidewalk, anything, you want to make sure that there's colliders. That way the character doesn't fall through the floor or anything weird like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit generate colliders for everything. Okay. Now swap UVs is pretty important. When you create objects in a 3D application, like say Maya, Max, or Softimage, you're going to have the ability to create multiple UV sets. Okay. Now, usually the reason people do this is so that they can do something called light mapping, and we'll talk about this later. All right. So sometimes when you bring in objects into Unity, the UVs may come in messed up or swapped the wrong way. This is usually an error on part of the 3D application's Fbx exporter. So sometimes, for example, the Softimage Fbx exporter is known to be pretty buggy and kind of quirky, even though it works. You have to know that there are some quirks there to get around. So when you import, if you notice that your UVs are swapped the wrong way, you can use this option to re-swap them and fix them up. Generate lightmap UVs is actually pretty important. Okay, if your object only has one UV set and you're going to be light mapping inside of Unity 3 Pro using the Beast Light Mapper, you want to make sure that your Generate Lightmap UVs is actually turned on. And when you do that, you get these advanced options that you can pop up. This controls the UV layout for those objects. Now, default options actually work out pretty good, so I wouldn't mess with any of that. If you do, make sure that you know exactly what you're doing before you actually tweak any of those settings, okay? So under normals and tangents, I like to leave this stuff alone. We have quite a few different options here. We can import normals with our object, okay, which is usually the best way to go. If you see that you're having some weird issues with the way that the normals are calculated or whatnot, or you forgot to, calculate your normals in your 3D application, you can have Unity calculate the normals for you, okay? Down here we have materials. We can create materials per texture or per material or have it off. So if you don't want Unity to import any materials, you want to create them from scratch yourself, go ahead and feel free to turn that option off. I like to keep it on at the default, okay? Animations, none of these assets have animations, so we might as well just skip that part right there, okay? And all this animation compression stuff has to do with animation, so we're not going to be going over that stuff. Now, when you finish setting your import options, you want to make sure that you hit the apply button right here, okay? That way it can apply the options to the imported mesh. So I'll hit apply, and basically what Unity does, it re-imports with the new options. And when Unity's done, that's it. We can go ahead and drag and drop our object into our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag on the cables and pipes asset and drop it anywhere in our scene. So here is our asset. You can see what it is, just some detail objects of some cables and stuff that will be in our environment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the transform of this object, and I'm going to take the position. Right now you can see the position is kind of funny. We got some funny numbers. I'm going to place 0, 0, and 0 for the position for the X, Y, and Z. Alright, and then that's it. I'm done with cables and pipes. Next I'm going to go to ceiling. I'm going to set up the import options, so the scale factor to 1. I'm going to tell it to generate colliders, generate light map UVs is good. All this other stuff, leave it alone. I'm going to hit apply. And then I'm going to take the ceiling, drag and drop it into my scene. I'm going to take its transforms and set it to 0, 0, and 0, so it places it in the correct location. Alright? I'm going to do the same thing for debris. So I think you get the idea now. You've already seen a couple of examples. Scale factor 1, generate colliders on, generate light map UVs on. Hit apply. When it finishes applying the settings, drag and drop the item into the scene, and then take its transforms up here in the inspector and set it to 0, 0, and 0 so that it's positioned in the correct place it's supposed to be in the world. Okay, so you've seen me do that 3 times already. I don't think I need to show you that over and over again another 12 or 15 times. So go ahead and get that done on your own. I'm going to go ahead and do it myself. We'll meet up in the next video where we'll continue working on other parts of Unity.